So when I caught wind of this game in 2021, I thought it was originally a 4X game, so it kind of just went immediately into the bin. And then they put out a new trailer, and I had a little bit of a closer look, and my brain just went, ooh, that just kind of looks like Homeworld. And then on further reading, it is apparently an RTS just on a much larger scale. And as a preamble, I'm just going to say there are videos that go way more into the depths and the whole ship mechanics than I'm going to describe, so go have a look at them. But this is more of a sonar ping for you to have a look at it and maybe get excited and maybe kind of have a discussion in the comments. Do you think it looks like Homeworld is the first question that I'm going to ask, just on a much larger scale. But anyway, let's start at the beginning. So it's published by Hooded Horse. It is developed by Stutter Fox Studios. This is the first title, and the game is called Falling Frontier. It is not a multiplayer game. It is a single player game, and it is a sci-fi RTS. There is also no story campaign to this. I believe there's one that surrounds the tutorial, but basically you get a procedurally generated star system and you go off and then you play the game out on a big grand campaign. I'm guessing it's going to work kind of like how Total War does, because that game has like random elements, but it has this kind of like story driven part to it. But before we go through the main 4 elements to it, the main thing that really attracted me to this was the fact that the game looks visually very, very impressive. And I'm praying that Homeworld 3 looks like this or even better, kind of like, you know, the lighting effects and the weapons firing off and the smaller ship zooming around all over the place. I don't want it to be as in depth as this, because there is a lot of components to this, and even going through and just doing the research material for it, I got a headache with just how many systems there are. But there is 100% a market for this kind of thing. There are people who love, you know, the intricacies, balancing economy and weapons and people and, you know, managing the universe. I mean, you only have to look at the Stellaris series to realize just how popular space big RTSs are. Anyway, so it kind of splits out into 4 components that they're hoo-haring about. If you want a more detailed break on them, then I highly recommend that you go have a look at Party Elite's video on this. He seems to have his finger literally inside the artery of this game and has all the, you know, complexities that you want to be described. But if you're like myself and just want the, you know, the quick whip over, so yeah, the 4 main systems. So you've got the star systems. So these are procedurally generated. You get a whole load of planets, you get moons, you get asteroid belts, and you get nebulae as well. And to aid your conquering of the universe, essentially, you've got to build shipyards for military stuff, civilian stuff. There's supply depots, there's also refineries, there's also recon stations that you can use, and there's a whole load of other research and technology that you can do. You can unlock different ship hulls, there's all sorts of weapons, there's orbital facilities, and also you can colonize in a whole multitude of different ways. Now, the colonizing of space is kind of like pretty standard stuff when it comes to these type of games, but they do have a pretty cool combat system as well, which they are talking about. So the combat is pretty deep, it's involved, you have to be there rather than just, you know, letting ships fire off. And that is if you want to get the most out of the combat. So, you know, you get those RTSs and there are bullets flying everywhere, and sometimes you go into like, well, why hasn't it hit my own units? Why haven't I just blown up everything? That can happen in this. So if you fire and you miss, it can actually end up hitting an unintended target. Additionally, stuff can also ricochet off hulls and hit other ships. There's also subsystems on the ships, which I thought was pretty cool, so that you can like target specific areas of a ship to disable it and do different things. There's also the Homeworld tier system as well, so you've got like, you know, very large immobile ships that might have big powerful weapons, and then you've got the smaller, more mobile ships that might be, you know, better suited for fighting the bigger ships, or, you know, fighting and shooting the modules off. Or alternatively, you can like hide them away and set up big ambushes and all those kind of things. They've also talked about the logistics system as well, saying that it's a core part of the game. So essentially, if you're weaker than your opponent, you can end up actually going into guerrilla warfare. You can raid supply depots and refineries for resources. You can also blockade colonies as well. There's a whole system of supply chains which you can interrupt and block out as well to make things difficult. And the reason they mention this is because I think what they're trying to avoid is that you end up with like a big death ball of units and you just send them to a designation and then kill everything. And say to avoid this, you've got a logistics chain that needs to follow up on these big fleets. And if you interrupt them and play around with them, then, you know, you can make your opponent's life pretty hellish. There's also an intel system that they've mentioned about, so you've got scout ships, you've got probes. I think these things are pretty standard in exploration games, or just RTSs in general. But one of the things in the recon that caught my eye was that they had a video, so they said like, the ships can be disabled and, they can be left, but the crew can actually survive and you can have officers on them. And if you capture these officers, you can use them to give you intel on enemy positions, for example. Which I thought was a nice little touch, and this goes into the kind of complex, smaller systems of the overall game. Now, the other thing that makes their intel system actually quite unique is that they do have a hiding system. So you can hide behind moons, you can hide in gas giants, for example. Scanning doesn't automatically just detect everything in a certain area, it will get blocked by planets. You have also asteroids that block line of sight and visibility. And personally, I thought that was really cool because it just adds another layer to kind of the RTS elements. Now, the last thing, which I thought was probably one of the cooler elements of this game, is the designer. So there are 20 ships that you can research. There's frigates, there's destroyers, cruisers and battleships. And those are just the military ships. There's also civilian ships that you can build as well. But what's really cool is that each of these ship chassis have different points that you can attach different weapons for different jobs. You can also assign them different crews, and there's also different internal modules that you can put on your ship to, make it tailored to whatever specific job you want it to do. And for example, I think one of the modules that I saw was that there's a module that for rescuing people, for example. I've mentioned this before, but each of the ships as well requires its own crew. They're named and they have ranks as well. Now, alongside with these personalities, you can actually bring different abilities and traits to your ship. What they are, I don't know at the moment. I've probably imagined that it's something like a stat increase and fire weapons faster or something. But personally, I do think that premise is really cool because you can get really attached to a ship and, kind of root for its crew. You can set up your own enterprise, for example, which actually brings me on to the last point that I want to talk about, which is the mods, which they have promised that there is mod support for this game. So you can, as you say, if you wanted to make a Star Trek themed game for this, then I imagine you could. Anyway, take a look at this. This is coming out on Q2 of 2022. And yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. And I shall be back with more games, news and reviews soon.